It was around 7 plus in the evening, almost 8. It was getting dark, but there was still a bit of light left. The other workers saw a silhouette of a man walking towards the tree from the work site. This, by the way, takes place around the construction site, okay? He was wearing a work helmet and safety vest, so he was not immediately recognizable, but the workers knew each other well and could guess who it was. No one paid him any mind. After all, they were all grown men, and the workday had just ended. And the workers were busy packing up, so no one thought much about why Bob would go onto the site where they were specifically told it was out of bounds. It was not till someone saw Bob draw out a parang to chop himself in the neck that there was a flurry of commotion. The workers dropped what they were doing and they ran towards their friend. The first few who arrived tried to stop him, but Bob continued chopping away at his own neck. And it took a considerably long time before Bob collapsed to the side in a pool of his own blood. By the time news got to me and I got to the scene, Bob was cold and lifeless. Police and paramedics were called in, and a full investigation was conducted. When the preliminary report came back a few days later, it said that it wasn't possible for Bob to have killed himself. The force of the blows and the depth of the cuts were not possible to be self-inflicted. But this went against more than a dozen eyewitnesses' accounts. Now, the police didn't know what to classify this as, so they just went with an unnatural death. Now, I was in my container office going through the report, and I really felt uneasy, as if I was being watched. Construction had stopped for a few days, so the site was quiet and empty. And on our own, we were also investigating the incident by speaking to the co-workers. Bob had no reason to kill himself. He wasn't married, therefore he had no marital or financial problems. He got along well with his peers, and he'd been working for only 3 years in Singapore, and I couldn't find any logical reason for this sudden behavior. The problems, however, just began. The whole week, workers in the dorm started reporting having nightmares, seeing the dead worker coming to visit them. Each of them had the same vivid dreams where Bob would stand in the corner of their dorm and try to reach out to them, but they couldn't make out the words he was saying. Now, on the evening of the 7th day, I had an urgent call from the dorm manager. One of the workers got possessed. So I decided to call up the shifu who we hired to bless the place, and I told him what happened. Now, he rushed down with his assistant, and they did a ritual, all right? Had the red strings, the bells, and the candles. We allowed 2 other workers to stay and help. Everybody else, they had to vacate the place. And whatever offerings we offered, it was rejected. And I saw with my own eyes the beer can that we were offering, the can just exploded and the beer just sprayed everywhere. Candles that we lit got blown out. And mind you, these candles were in an enclosed dorm with no wind, okay? At that time, my only concern was to pray that the spirit did not jump into my body, and I ended up bringing something home by accident. And so I remember I also started praying. Initially, we believed it to be Bob's spirit, but as the ritual went on, it became apparent that there were a few more spirits present as well. We learned that before our construction company took over, there was another company before us that gave up the contract and they left. They tried to clear the place and they managed to chop down one of the trees. Now, much later on, I met another foreman who had worked in that company and we exchanged stories. Now, that company, I tell you, was plagued with so many problems and accidents that they couldn't carry on anymore. Our company ended up taking over, but the spirits, well, they were already angered. And apparently, I learned that also the bosses knew about these incidents, which is why that particular place was out of bounds. Now, Bob, well, at the end of the day, he was just an unfortunate victim. The spirits claimed that if they built upon their land, they would claim at least one life per year. And angry spirits That's not really a reason that I can bring to the bosses for us to break the contract and then end up losing hundreds and thousands of dollars. One option that the Shifu suggested was to build a large altar below the tree, which would open a gateway to hell in that area. Okay, we all knew that was a crazy idea, but here we are trying to get rid of spirits, and he's suggesting opening a gateway to hell. But what do we know, right? So the Shifu went on to explain that if we build an altar here to attract wandering spirits, then we can feed them to the ancient tree spirits as tribute. That way, the living won't be harmed. Like that also can. The Shifu went on to do what was needed, and I suppose it worked, because since that incident, we managed to avoid any more mishaps. The tree was left where it was, and the estate was built around it. But this wasn't the only place of stories. There were many places. Back then, at new estates, there's a patch of area that was surprisingly left untouched, or you might find trees with an altar beneath them. You look around, all these places have a story. Now, over time, people have forgotten what these places are for. And I've been back to some of these sites. Many of them no longer exist. But for those that do, their altar has grown bigger over the years and are not as scary looking as how it was back in the 80s. Altars back then openly pray to underworld gods. Now you get colorful deities instead. But the purpose is still the same.
And true story, guys. I'm just going to share this with you guys. I live in Pasir Ris. There is a BTO stretch under the MRT station. True story. MRT line, BTO stretch. Back then, there was a tree I could see from my room. They tore down everything else in the place. They could not tear down that particular tree.
Yeah.
What do you mean? I always get very interested, right? When people say, oh, there was a tree and they couldn't tear it down, or they were trying to, pull down this part of the expressway to do construction and they couldn't, for some reason, they couldn't do it. What do you mean that they couldn't do it? Like, what would happen? Like if they switched on, maybe a bulldozer to try to bring down, the bulldozer would stop working?
So in the case of Uncle Chan, in the case of the Botanical Gardens director, when they try to cut down these trees with bulldozer, with chainsaw, the machinery would fail when it touches the tree. And or the person who cuts the tree or attempts to cut the tree will be met with an accident. Something would happen to the person.
During at the point they were trying to cut down the tree, or the night before?
At the point they cut down the tree, machinery will stop, they go back, they'll fall down, they'll sit down, they'll break their arm. An accident would happen. And it's occurred so many times, so often, that it has gone past the point of being purely coincidental into people actually believing it. So talking about Pantang as today's theme, it has gone from 80s, 90s, and Uncle Chan's a retiree. He's seen all this in the 80s. That was hardcore. But people are still practicing it today. What I saw was in 2000, late 2000s.
I mean, like what happened to the other company, right? Before Uncle Chan's company, the construction company that got scared away, right? Because everything just went wrong, and I think it's up to the next company to see whether they have precautions that can get them through this safely. If not, take the warning and go, There's no winning this kind of situation, I think when it comes to sites that are protected because there are spirits there, there are deities there, I'm absolutely a believer. Singapore is full of places like this. I grew up near a tree that was like this in Tanah Merah. There was a very, very old tree with a huge shrine and everything around it developed, but that one, no one could touch it. Finally, it disappeared. So something must have worked. They must have placated the spirit. Maybe they moved it somewhere, right? And did the right ceremonies, but it's always about negotiating, right?
Toa Payoh has one big one. Remember the Toa Payoh one? Toa Payoh Central? A huge altar, right? And that one
when I was young, I remember that. Yeah.
What you talking about? You still young, Jonathan.
Thank you. I was setting up for this. Thank you, Tim. Well done.
Yeah.
That's the mark of a professional. Yes. But yeah. Toa Payoh.
The other place that he told me, so he told me a few places. I remember two. So Payo was one because I remember going to that place, and the other one is over at what's that place? Tangling area near Tangling, near the up the hill past the African Bula, American Embassy, the
Right.
drinking
Okay.
spot. There's a tree there with an altar as well. I said these are places with trees that you cannot cut down.
Yeah.
When the tree is ready, lightning will strike it, but not before that.
Near my uncle's house in Kovan, around Kovan Garden, there was also one. You know, it was a lovely estate, and there was this humongous banyan tree that was growing out of control. You know, and by all logic, right, something should have been done about it for the sake of the neighborhood. But no, it was allowed to go rampant. It was, right there because it was older than anyone here, any of the houses there. Nobody dared to touch it.
I mean, it's funny that we're talking about trees and how much respect goes into trees and the spirits that are associated with that. I was just having a conversation with one of my RPS Radio Paranormal Singapore teammates the other day, and we were talking about Bali, right? And in Bali, they truly believe in the spirits of the trees. Not so much.
Oh yes.
Not so much that they won't cut it down, but they will wrap like sarongs and cloths and beautiful pieces of baju around the tree. Now, I mean, if you go to Bali very often, right, there is a place. I mean, if you eat babi guling, right, and most people who go to Bali love to eat babi guling. It's like it's that suckling pig. And there is this place in Ubud, right, which is called Ibu Okas, right? And Ibu Okas is this like multi-story, shop house, right? And the funny thing about it is, smack in the center of this place is this giant tree. And every time I went there, I'd be like, a place of business. You know what I mean? The first thing you do is you cut down this tree lah. You know what I mean? The amount of space is taking up and right in the center of your dining area. You know, you would have so much more space to put more tables, extend your kitchen and stuff like that. But they just never did it. In fact, if anything, they dressed the tree up and all that. They've kept it in that, and they will build around it. Any renovations that go on around the tree. Never through the tree. They won't cut the tree. And that was the more when we study, we realized, over there trees are king. You know what I mean? They will build around. They will never cut down a tree for a building. They will build your building around the tree.
Correct. Because then not only do you placate the thing, but you get them on your side. Whatever entity is in that tree is now going to protect you because you are part of the tree now. I think you're beyond pain at that moment, right? Because something else is driving you rather than your normal system. He's not feeling the pain, and I mean, one of the things we often hear about possessions is superhuman strength, right? And they're talking about the cuts, right? Forensically, I think in the story, right, the cuts that they saw and they examined were too deep to be made.
Yes,
by himself.
So even then, right, I'm like thinking, okay, you can talk about the mental issue of it, the psychological. Yes, I bore through the pain, right, and I carried on doing that. But I mean, just the physicality of it, the physiology of it, right? If you cut into, say, your carotid artery or something like that, and he was using a lot of strength, with all that blood that's not making it to your brain, your body would just have collapsed. He wouldn't have been able to stand there for minutes just chopping away. He would have lost too much blood that his entire system would have just broken down. So the fact that he could have done it, I just don't understand the biology of it,
I don't imagine he was chopping for minutes lah. I think in that moment of terror, expanded by the tele, right? It feels, cinematically it's very long, but I think it really would have been just a few chops and that's it. The human body can't take more than that.
That's what, I agree. So I mean, that was a little bit confusing. Once again, where was the camera footage? I mean, security cameras and all that, right?
But I mean, it's impressive and slightly awe-inspiring, right? What these spirits will do to protect their land, and how harsh they will be, right? And how, I think, how ancient and powerful this spirit must be if it wants, one human life a year.
I like that. It was, I mean, I thought it was interesting that he was so specific. You know what I mean? It wasn't just bad things will befall you. It was, I will take one life a year until you leave us alone.
So if you think about it from from an investigative point of view, this is the voice of someone who's done it before. Right? He's made these types of deals before, with villagers, with kampongs, whoever has tried to encroach upon his land. This is not new. He's not winging it, right? He's got a price tag.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, they still carried on, right? I mean, so I am wondering what is the deal that they made at the end of the day?
I mean, the Shifu, right? Eugene, just to check, right? So the Shifu did go ahead and build the altar to lure other spirits.
Yes,
so
but now to this day, did he say that the altar was still there to this very day?
He did not speak about the particular altar for this particular site. He was talking about how there were altars in multiple sites. This was just one story. And some of these altars have been removed. The trees also have been removed.
Yeah.
So what I thought was really cool was the ingenuity of the Shifu saying that, okay, tree spirit, you need a soul, right? I put an altar here. You bring in all the wandering souls. You have a buffet of the wandering souls. You leave the living alone. How is that fair for the wandering spirits who just walk there, pick up the food to eat, and then cannot suck in by the tree?
Yeah. Is that really what they do? Do you offer other souls, I suppose, wandering spirits, to feed a larger entity?
This is a rare story. It's a very rare case. Yeah.
My understanding, again, this is not science, it's my understanding, is that the spirit realm deals with rules and deals with promises. So a soul is a soul. If I can outwit you and give you a soul, you have to let the living go. Because I forfeit my
Yes, but
promise.
I mean that soul is not yours to offer, right?
To this situation, it was not even the fault of the guy who cut off his neck, but the tree spirit wanted a soul, period.
Yeah,
So,
I know. But what I'm saying is to then, open up a gate to hell, right? So that the tree spirit could feed onto all these other souls. I mean, can you just feed onto random souls? No, what?
It's unethical for me. It's unethical, right?
Unethical, yes.
Yeah, it's definitely unethical. On the Shifu side, I think it was a fix to the problem, but I think it will lead to much bigger problems later and much bigger imbalance, in the spirit world. Because what you're doing is you're aiding and abetting a rather villainous spirit, who doesn't care whether it's feeding on the living or the dead, right? And it just wants to be fed. I think it will take greater spiritual forces to conquer that one. It's something that New To Ma Mian have to come and take care of personally. Ox head and horse face.
But you see, I can also try to imagine how he is thinking, the Sifu is thinking. I am offering the souls of the wandering spirit to the tree, thereby reducing the haunting and the ghost level in the location. The living is unharmed. I am a hero.
Still unethical,
right?
Because
I don't imagine you get good karma points for that. Yeah,
because spirits have souls, or souls have spirits. And they're not they're not expendable, right? But yes, it does protect the living, which I assume is the Shifu's first priority, lah.
Is there anyone here? What did you find?
You are listening to Supernatural Confessions.